The distress signal reached Earth like a whisper from the void, a faint cry carried across the cold expanse of space. It wasn't meant for us, at least not intentionally. The signal had been encoded in a language so alien, so incomprehensible, that even Earth's most advanced AI systems struggled to decipher it. But humans have a knack for solving puzzles. Within weeks, linguists and cryptographers cracked enough of the message to understand its core plea. Help us. They are coming. It was a mistake, a terrible, fatal mistake. The message came from a distant star system, one humanity had never heard of before. The coordinates were embedded in the transmission, along with fragmented images of devastation, burning cities under alien skies, shattered ships drifting lifeless in orbit, and shadowy figures moving through the ruins. Whatever they were relentless. And the senders of the message, desperate. Humanity debated what to do. Some argued it wasn't our fight. Others saw an opportunity, a chance to prove ourselves on the galactic stage, to show we weren't just newcomers to the cosmos, but protectors, warriors. In the end, the decision was made, not by politicians or diplomats, but by the Admiralty of the United Terran Navy. If someone was calling for help, humanity would answer. And so the fleet was assembled. The flagship, Vanguard, led the charge, flanked by dozens of warships bristling with weapons that had never been tested in true interstellar combat. Humanity's finest soldiers, engineers, and scientists were aboard, their faces grim but determined. They didn't know what awaited them at the other end of the journey, but they knew one thing. Whoever had sent that message wouldn't be left to face their doom alone. When the fleet arrived in the alien system, the first thing they noticed was the silence. No welcoming party, no hails, no signs of life. Just a dead world hanging in the void, its surface scarred and blackened. The planet's atmosphere shimmered with strange energy signatures, remnants of some kind of battle or massacre. The second thing they noticed was the wreckage. Ships unlike anything humanity had ever seen drifted in orbit, their hulls torn open as if by some monstrous force. Some of the debris still glowed faintly, the heat of recent destruction lingering in the vacuum of space. And then there was the third thing, the thing that made every seasoned officer on the bridge of the Vanguard feel a chill crawl up their spine. Among the wreckage, something moved. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of motion on the edge of the sensors, too fast and erratic to be natural. Then came the shapes, dark, angular forms darting between the ruined ships, their movements predatory. Whatever these things were, they weren't scavengers. They were hunters. The fleet raised shields and armed weapons, the crews tense and ready. But the attack didn't come immediately. Instead, the hunters seemed to circle, watching, waiting. It was as if they were studying the human ships, assessing them. That's when the transmission came through. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was more like a presence, invasive and overwhelming, pressing into the minds of everyone aboard the fleet. Images flashed before their eyes, visions of planets consumed, civilizations extinguished, entire galaxies falling silent. And then came the words, cold and emotionless, spoken directly into their thoughts. You should not have come. Before anyone could react, the hunters struck. They came from all directions, swarming the fleet with terrifying speed. Their ships were jagged and organic, like living nightmares forged from metal and flesh. They moved in ways that defied physics, phasing in and out of existence, appearing behind human vessels faster than targeting systems could lock on. The battle was chaos. Human ships fired everything they had, railguns, plasma cannons, missile salvos, but the hunters were relentless. For every enemy ship destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The Vanguard's captain barked orders, his voice steady despite the panic spreading through the crew. Hold the line! Protect the fleet! But it wasn't enough. One by one, human ships fell, their hulls breached, their crews lost. The hunters showed no mercy, no hesitation. They were efficient, surgical, as if this was nothing more than routine extermination. On the surface of the dead planet below, the truth became clear. A reconnaissance team from the Vanguard managed to land, hoping to find survivors or answers. What they found instead was a graveyard. The cities were empty, their inhabitants gone. But the walls told a story of a species that had thrived, built wonders, and reached for the stars, only to be annihilated by the very beings they had called for help. The hunters weren't invaders. They were summoned. The aliens who had sent the distress signal hadn't been asking for rescue. They had been trying to pass the curse on to someone else, to redirect the hunters' attention away from themselves. And humanity, in its eagerness to play the hero, had walked straight into the trap. Back in orbit, the fleet was on the verge of collapse. The Vanguard was heavily damaged, its engines failing, its weapons nearly depleted. The Admiral made a desperate decision. All remaining ships, form up on me. We're going to punch through their lines and jump out of here. It was a suicide mission, but there was no other choice. If the fleet stayed, it would be wiped out. And if even one hunter ship followed them back to Earth. The final moments of the battle were a blur of fire and fury. The Vanguard led the charge, its guns blazing, carving a path through the swarm. Behind it, the surviving ships followed, their hulls battered but intact. As the fleet prepared to jump, the hunters closed in, their ships converging on the Vanguard like vultures. And then, just as the jump drive activated, the Admiral gave one last order: detonate the core. The explosion was blinding, a supernova of energy that tore through the hunters' ranks, buying the fleet the precious seconds it needed to escape. When the surviving ships emerged back in human space, they were met with silence. No cheers, no celebrations, just the heavy weight of what they had seen and what they had unleashed. Because the hunters weren't finished. They had tasted humanity now, learned its scent, and somewhere in the dark corners of the galaxy, they were preparing to follow. Humanity had answered the call for help, but in doing so it had awakened something far worse, something that couldn't be stopped, something that wouldn't stop until every star in the sky went dark. And the worst part, this was only the beginning. The survivors of the fleet returned to Earth battered, haunted, and forever changed. The ships that limped back into orbit were a shadow of the proud armada that had departed. Hulls were scorched, systems barely functional, and the crews, those who had made it back alive, wore 1,000-yard stares. These were men and women who had stared into the abyss and seen it staring back. The debriefings were grim. Every detail of the encounter was analyzed, dissected, and debated by military strategists, scientists, and politicians. The hunters were unlike anything humanity had ever faced before. They weren't just advanced, they were something else entirely. Their technology defied understanding, their tactics were flawless, and their motives still a mystery. But one thing was clear: they weren't finished with us. In the weeks following the fleet's return, strange signals began to appear on long-range sensors. At first they were faint, almost imperceptible, like whispers carried on the cosmic wind. But they grew stronger, closer. The hunters were coming, and this time they wouldn't be content with picking off a few ships. This time they would come for Earth. Panic spread across the planet like wildfire. News of the failed mission leaked to the public, despite the government's best efforts to contain it. People demanded answers. Who were these hunters? Why were they after us? And most importantly, how could we stop them? The truth was, no one knew. Humanity had always prided itself on its resilience, its ingenuity, its ability to adapt and overcome. But this was different. The hunters weren't an enemy you could reason with or outsmart. They were a force of nature, a cosmic predator that saw humanity as nothing more than prey. Still, humanity wasn't about to go down without a fight. The United Terran Navy began mobilizing every resource at its disposal. Shipyards worked around the clock to build new warships, each one more heavily armed and armored than the last. Scientists pored over the data collected during the battle, searching for any weakness in the hunters' technology. Weapons research programs were accelerated, ethical considerations thrown aside in the face of extinction. And then there was Project Blackout. No one outside the highest levels of government knew exactly what Blackout entailed. Rumors swirled. Some said it was a doomsday weapon, capable of wiping out entire star systems. Others claimed it was a plan to evacuate a select few to a hidden colony, leaving the rest of humanity to fend for itself. Whatever the truth, it was clear that Blackout was humanity's last desperate gamble. As the months passed, the tension grew unbearable. The signals from the hunters became more frequent, more distinct. It was only a matter of time before they arrived. And when they did, Earth would become a battlefield. For some, the waiting was the worst part. Soldiers trained relentlessly, knowing they might never live to see the fruits of their labor. Families clung to each other, cherishing what little time they had left. And everywhere there was the unspoken question, what if we lose? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. The hunters arrived without warning, their ships materializing in the outer reaches of the solar system like shadows emerging from the void. They didn't announce their presence, didn't issue demands. They simply began to advance, their dark, angular vessels moving with an eerie, predatory grace. Earth's defenses were ready, or as ready as they could be. The fleet met the hunters head-on, a wall of human steel and firepower standing between the invaders and the homeworld. The battle that followed was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The hunters tore through the fleet with terrifying efficiency. Human ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, their crews lost in an instant. For every hunter ship destroyed, dozens of human vessels fell. The hunters' weapons were beyond anything humanity could counter. Beams of energy that sliced through shields and armor like paper, projectiles that moved faster than the eye could follow, and strange pulsing waves that seemed to disrupt the very fabric of reality. On Earth, people watched in horror as the battle unfolded on their screens. The sky above turned into a graveyard of burning wreckage, the remnants of humanity's last stand drifting silently in orbit. But even in the face of annihilation, humanity refused to surrender. Project Blackout was activated. Deep beneath the surface of the planet, in a facility hidden from even the most advanced sensors, a team of scientists and engineers worked frantically to bring the project online. It wasn't a weapon. Not exactly. It was something far more dangerous. Blackout was a signal, a pulse designed to mimic the hunter's own transmissions. Its purpose was simple, to lure them away. Away from Earth, away from humanity, to send them chasing after a phantom threat, buying humanity precious time to regroup, rebuild, and prepare for the next encounter. But there was a catch. The signal needed a source, a beacon powerful enough to reach across the galaxy. And that beacon had to be mobile, capable of leading the hunters on a wild chase through the stars. In short, it needed a crew. Volunteers stepped forward, knowing full well it was a one-way trip. They boarded the Erebus, a prototype stealth ship equipped with the Blackout transmitter. As the hunters closed in on Earth, the Erebus launched, its engines burning bright as it disappeared into the void. The hunters took the bait. One by one, their ships broke off from the assault, turning to pursue the Erebus. Within hours, the skies above Earth were clear. Humanity had been spared, for now. But at what cost? The crew of the Erebus knew they were living on borrowed time. The hunters would never stop, never tire. They would chase the ship to the ends of the universe if necessary, and when they finally caught it, Back on Earth, the survivors began to pick up the pieces. Cities were rebuilt, defenses strengthened. But the memory of the hunters lingered, a shadow over everything. Humanity had survived, but it hadn't won. Not yet. Because somewhere out there, in the cold, infinite darkness of space, the hunters were still coming, and humanity knew that when they returned, there would be no escape. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The Erebus became a ghost story, whispered among the ranks of soldiers and scientists alike. Its crew, heroes who had sacrificed everything, were immortalized in legend, their names etched into monuments on every continent. But the truth of their fate was far less romantic. Out in the void, the Erebus ran silent, its stealth systems pushed to their limits as it led the hunters deeper and deeper into uncharted space. The crew lived every moment on a knife's edge, knowing that even the smallest mistake, a miscalculation, a power surge, a stray signal, could mean the end. They didn't speak much anymore. What was there to say? Each of them knew they were dead already. The only question was how long they could keep running. But the hunters weren't just chasing, they were learning. Back on Earth, strange anomalies began to appear. At first, they were dismissed as glitches, sensor malfunctions, data errors. But soon, the evidence became undeniable. Small hunter ships were appearing in isolated corners of the solar system, scouting, probing. They were testing humanity's defenses, adapting to our tactics. The Erebus had bought time, but not enough. The hunters hadn't been fooled entirely. They were coming back, and this time they would be ready. Humanity scrambled to prepare for the inevitable. New alliances were forged, old rivalries set aside. Resources were pooled on an unprecedented scale, entire economies redirected toward the war effort. Scientists worked tirelessly to reverse engineer what little hunter technology had been recovered from the wreckage of the first battle. Progress was slow, agonizingly so, but there were breakthroughs, small glimmers of hope in the darkness. One such breakthrough came from an unlikely source, the blackout signal itself. In studying its effects, researchers discovered something unexpected. The hunters' technology wasn't just advanced, it was alive in a way. Their ships, their weapons, even their communication systems operated on principles that blurred the line between machine and organism. And the blackout signal, crude as it was, had disrupted that balance. It had hurt them. If humanity could refine the signal, weaponize it, there might be a chance, not just to survive, but to fight back. But time was running out. The Erebus sent one final transmission before going dark. It was short, garbled, barely intelligible. But the message was clear. They're coming. And then silence. The hunters returned with a vengeance. This time they didn't come in small numbers. They came in waves, their ships blotting out the stars, their weapons carving through human defenses like a hot knife through butter. Earth's fleets fought valiantly, but it was a losing battle. For every hunter ship destroyed, a dozen more took its place. Cities burned, orbital stations fell, and the skies rained fire. But humanity wasn't the same species it had been during the first encounter. We had learned, we had adapted, and we had prepared. The blackout weapon was unleashed. It wasn't perfect, far from it. The signal was unstable, its effects unpredictable. But when it hit the hunters, the results were devastating. Their ships faltered, their movements became erratic. Some turned on each other, their systems overwhelmed by the corrupted signal. For the first time, humanity saw the hunters hesitate. For the first time, they bled. The tide began to turn. On the ground, soldiers armed with new weapons, hybrids of human and hunter technology, pushed back against the invaders. In orbit, the remnants of Earth's fleet rallied, striking at the weakened hunter ships with renewed ferocity. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a start. As the battle raged, a chilling realization dawned on humanity's leaders. The hunters weren't just here to destroy us. They were here to take something. Deep beneath the surface of the planet, in ancient caverns untouched by human hands, the hunters uncovered structures, machines, older than Earth itself. Machines that pulsed with the same eerie energy as the hunters' ships. We had thought the hunters were predators, mindless destroyers. But now we understood the truth. They were collectors. And Earth was just another piece in their vast, incomprehensible puzzle. The war wasn't over. Far from it. Humanity had won a reprieve, a chance to catch its breath. But the hunters would return, stronger, smarter, more determined than ever. And next time, they wouldn't just be coming for us. They'd be coming for whatever lay buried in the heart of our world. Whatever it was, it had called to them once, and it would call to them again. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the very soul of humanity,